Instrumental music flourished in the classical period. We had a lot of new forms, and one of them is called the Sonata-Allegro Form. And it's something that's a little complicated, so before we get into that, we're going to look at what some of the new forms were. The first of all is the classical symphony. The symphony was very popular, and we still use it today. The symphony is a large work. In the time of Haydn, the symphony could be maybe 20 minutes or more. As it progressed, it got much larger. Symphonies are multi-movement works. The classical symphony has 4 movements. The first is fast, allegro. The second is slow with maybe a theme and variation. The third is usually in dance tempo, and it sometimes is even called a minuet or other dance names. And the last is fast again. We also have the sonata, which is a work usually for 1 or 2 instruments, and it's also a multi-movement work with contrasting movements. Chamber music was very important in the classical period. Chamber, meaning room, is meant for a small group of instruments. Very popular in the classical period was the string quartet, which was a group of 2 violins, a viola, and a cello. Each of the musicians in the quartet would play a different part of the music, so they wouldn't be playing the same thing altogether through the whole thing. If you remember from the classical period, we had the concerto, the solo concerto. The concerto grosso just wasn't used very much in the classical period, but solo concertos, again, we looked at that. It had 3 movements, fast, slow, fast. And it was very popular in the classical period. Now let's look at this Sonata-Allegro form. Well, it's for instruments, and it's a single movement. It's used in the first movement of all of these works that we just talked about. A variation of the ABA form, meaning it's going to have 2 themes. One would be A, one would be B, and then we could use the A again. It's different than a sonata. We just looked at the sonata, which is a form of its own. But get this, the Sonata Allegro is the name of the first movement of the sonata. Got that? It's a little complicated. Let me try to explain it to you. Remember last week when we studied the Baroque, we looked at the parts of the fugue, and these are exactly the same parts, only they are more structured. And we're going to have an exposition which exposes the themes, a development which develops those themes, and a recap, right? Let's look at this little diagram here of the Sonata-Allegro form. We have a subject, just like in a fugue. Sometimes it's called a theme. We have a second subject, which is in contrast. So what it is, if one is fast, the second one's going to be slow. If the one is happy, the contrasting one is going to be sad. So it's not just the tempos, it's the moods, and so on. And in between, if you look right here, there's what's called a bridge. And you'll usually have a little theme of its own, which takes you from the principal subject to the second one. And the reason you have to have a bridge is these are going to change keys. And most likely, for example, if this started in C major, the second key might be E minor, something like that. And so you have to have a little bridge to get you from one key signature to the other. And then you have a closing section which gets you into the development. Let's look down here. The exposition exposes the main themes of the work, and again they're contrasting. This is much more important in the classical period. They really want you to hear this theme. Most of them are very catchy, and it's so important that you know that theme or the themes. It's the whole exposition is repeated 2 times. So when you go to a concert for a symphony, for example, you will hear the first part and it will end, and you'll think, okay, that's the end of the exposition, but it doesn't. It goes back to the beginning and repeats the whole exposition. Again, you'll have something that'll get you into the development. Sometimes you'll still use that bridge theme. There are different ways to get in. The development, again, this is where you play with the theme. It can be broken into parts called motifs. Motifs can be really little parts of the themes. It can change in texture, go from polyphonic to homophonic and so on. Change in rhythm is often. Sometimes if you have something with like 4 quarter notes, it may change it to 4 whole notes or something like that. And the moods can change. It can be very dark or very bright, but you'll still hear the themes. Again, you'll need probably a bridge to get you into the recap. Not always, but sometimes. And the recap is much more important now than it was in the Baroque period. The themes return one at a time, and you will hear them, and then it concludes. At the end of some of the big works, you'll have something called a coda. And in Italian, of course, all of our vocabulary is in Italian, but if in Italian, coda means tail. And in the classical period, it was not so much flashy, but when you get into Beethoven, you'll see that the coda can be very splashy, fancy ending, and the coda is just that. It's just it's an ending, and it's not required, but it can be. The Sonata-Allegro form is used as the first movement in a classical symphony. So depending on whether it's Haydn, Mozart, whatever, the first movement will be in the Sonata-Allegro form, and you'll be able to hear the themes and so on. And also in chamber music and the classical sonata, and also in the concerto, which we looked at. So it's a form within a form, okay?